Hi there, welcome in. What can I get started for you? Ever tried holding in a bathroom break for an entire shift because your office restroom feels like it's straight out of a horror movie? That's me right now. I may have briefly lost consciousness or started thinking in whatever language Animal Crossing characters speak. The line is blurry at this point. But enough about my bladder-based suffering. Let's talk about today's stories, ones that involve creepy stalkers in familiar places, deer with unsettling intentions, and things in the sky that definitely weren't supposed to be there. If you've ever had a scary experience at work, you're not alone. And if it still haunts you, well, maybe it belongs in the next episode. For now, settle in, maybe lock the door behind you, because these are tales from the break room. Story 1. Back in 2017, not long after I graduated high school, I applied to work at Walmart. I didn't have a whole lot of plans at the time, just knew I didn't want to sit around doing nothing. When I showed up for the interview, they tried to steer me toward working at a register, but I told them straight up that wasn't for me. I wasn't trying to be rude, I just knew myself. I'm not a small girl, never have been. I'm about 5'8" and built a lot like my dad. Broad shoulders, strong frame, definitely not the petite, bubbly type you usually see behind the checkout lanes. Honestly, I've always gotten along better with guys than girls. It's just a personal thing. Women my age, at least back then, seemed to create drama out of nothing and talk circles around any issue without ever just dealing with it. That's not to say I didn't have female friends, but when it came to work, I much preferred being in a crew of guys who just got the job done and cracked dumb jokes while doing it. So I requested to work in the back, stocking, unloading, heavy lifting. Physical labor never bothered me. They put me on the overnight grocery team, which turned out to be perfect. Our shift started at 10 o'clock p.m. We'd unload the truck, stock shelves while the store was closed, and leave by 6 o'clock a.m. It was quiet, efficient, and the team was solid. Also, for the record, this Walmart wasn't one of those 24/7 ones that stayed open all night, thank God. I'd heard that used to be more common before COVID changed everything, but this location always shut its doors to customers overnight, which made the stocking process a lot less chaotic. My main friends at work were Ronnie and a guy everyone called Pearlman. Ronnie was the clown of the group. He had this wild talent for impressions, whether it was customers, managers, or even the automated checkout voice. You'd be crying laughing at 2 a.m. in a freezer aisle because he'd just done a pitch-perfect impression of our supervisor trying to explain shrinkage reports. Pearlman's real name was actually Pullman, but the nickname Pearlman came about after a pretty hilarious chain of events. One day at lunch, someone commented that his teeth looked unnaturally white after a dentist visit. Ronnie started jokingly calling him Pearly Man, and then someone pointed out how similar his name sounded to Ron Perlman, the actor. Since Ronnie and Pullman were already close, it just stuck. Triple pun, pearly white teeth, best friend named Ronnie, and the similarity to Ron Perlman. Honestly, it was genius in a stupid sort of way. Perlman was a huge gamer, like seriously hardcore. He'd talk endlessly about whatever he was playing, whether it was Minecraft, Skyrim, The Witcher, you name it. Eventually, the three of us started gaming together on weekends. We even made a private Discord server for it. That little corner of the internet became our weekend refuge, filled with inside jokes, shared screenshots, and late-night laughter. About 8 months after I started working there, they hired someone new, a guy named Setson, and yes, that's the name they gave us. I never figured out whether it was his first or last name. During the shift meeting, the supervisor introduced him as, "This is Setson. He'll be working grocery with you guys." And nobody ever clarified further. He was a quiet guy, maybe late 20s or early 30s, with blonde hair, freckles, and a fairly average-looking face. Not ugly, not especially attractive, just there. He did his work fine, never slacked off, but he didn't interact much. He didn't join us for lunch or laugh at the jokes. He existed on the fringes of our little team dynamic. At first I didn't think much of it. Some people are just introverted, right? But after a few weeks I started feeling a little bad for him. It must be lonely, working all night and never talking to anyone. So one night during our break, I mentioned it to Ronnie and Pearlman. "He seems so isolated," I said. "Maybe we should try to include him in something just once. See how it goes." Pearlman, always ready for a dare, smirked. "I dare you to invite him to the Discord. We're starting that new 7 Days to Die server this weekend. Might be his thing." "Oh." Ronnie jumped in, grinning. "You're always saying we should be nicer to the newbies." I rolled my eyes, but agreed. "Fine, but if it gets weird, it's on you two." After lunch, I made my way over to where Setson was stocking cereal. He looked up as I approached, and something about the way he smiled instantly put me off. It was wide, too wide, like someone who'd been told what a smile was supposed to look like, but didn't fully understand how to do it naturally. It looked painful, mechanical. "Hey," I said, trying to stay casual. "I don't think we've been properly introduced. Before I could finish, he said, "I'm Setson," still smiling that bizarre smile. His teeth were stained, yellow, almost brown at the edges. I don't know why that stood out to me, but it did. Maybe that's why he wasn't on a register, I thought. Too unsettling. "Okay, cool," I said awkwardly. "So me and some co-workers, Ronnie and Perlman, we game on the weekends sometimes. We're starting a new 7 Days to Die server this weekend. You play anything?" He nodded slowly, but didn't speak. "Well, if you want to join us, I can send you the Discord info." That's when it got really weird. He laughed, but not a normal laugh. It sounded like he was imitating a laugh rather than actually feeling it. It was hollow, stilted, and then, without changing his facial expression, tears started pouring down his cheeks. He was smiling, still forcing that robotic grin, but crying. I took a step back. "Okay, maybe next time," I mumbled and quickly walked away. Ronnie, who had been watching from a distance, burst into laughter when I returned. "That dude is not right." I told them everything, the tears, the smile, the weird vibe. Perlman tried to play it off. "Maybe he's just really shy." "No," I said, "this is different. There's something seriously off about him." The rest of the week I tried to put it out of my mind, but I kept catching him watching me. Not constantly, but enough that it got under my skin. Always from across the store, and every time our eyes met, he'd look away like he'd been caught doing something he shouldn't. Then Friday came. I clocked out around 6 o'clock a.m. like usual, said goodbye to Ronnie and Perlman, and walked across the dark parking lot toward my car. December mornings are cold and dim, the sun not yet high enough to brighten the sky. As I unlocked my door, I heard footsteps behind me. Then a voice, quiet but unmistakable, said, "I knew this one was yours." I spun around. Setson was standing maybe 10 feet away, staring at my car. Excuse me?" He didn't answer, just turned and walked back toward the store like nothing had happened. I stood there for a moment, frozen, then quickly got in my car and drove home. I was shaken, but tried to rationalize it. Maybe he was just awkward. Maybe he meant something else entirely. But the way he said it, like he'd been watching me, like he'd been trying to figure out which car was mine. I didn't see him again that weekend. He didn't show up online, and I was actually relieved. Then the following Friday morning came. I'd just finished my shift and was sliding into my car when suddenly a hand came around from the back seat and covered my mouth. The smell of garlic hit me first, strong and sour. The grip wasn't painful, just firm enough to startle me. I screamed and bolted out of the car. Spinning around, I looked through the back window, and there he was. Setson. Slowly rising from the floor of my back seat, still wearing that eerie, artificial smile. His eyes met mine through the glass. I ran. Back inside the store, I found Ronnie grabbing his stuff from his locker. "Setson was in my car," I gasped. "He grabbed me. He was hiding in my back seat." Ronnie stared at me like I'd lost it. "What do you mean he grabbed you?" "He was hiding back there. Please, come outside with me." He did. When we got back to the car, it was empty. The driver's door hung open just as I'd left it. Ronnie checked the back seat, under the seats, even the trunk. No one there. Then he pointed. "His car's still here." Sure enough, 3 spots over, his beat-up sedan was parked. "Maybe he's still around," Ronnie said. "Want me to go look?" "No, just drive me home, please." He agreed, and I was so grateful I nearly cried. I couldn't get into my car again, not after that. The next day, I called the store to report what happened. My supervisor listened, then said, "Funny you mentioned Setson. His car is still in the lot, but we haven't seen him. He never clocked out. No one's been able to reach him." I told him what had happened, and he promised to report it to corporate and the police. Later, they told us his file had no emergency contacts, and the address listed was an old one. He'd apparently moved out weeks ago. The police took statements, but there wasn't much to go on. No one knew who he really was. No one had seen him since that morning. His car was eventually towed, but Setson, he just vanished. And that's why, to this day, I always check my back seat before I get in the car. Every single time. You never know who or what might be waiting. Story 2. Deer in the Graveyard by Billy Towers. I was hired as an overnight security guard at a strip mall on Lake Street in Minneapolis, Minnesota. It wasn't my usual beat. I typically stuck to day shifts at less chaotic locations, but money had been tight. Rent was coming due, and my checking account was giving me silent judgment every time I dared to buy coffee. So when I saw the opportunity for some overtime, I took the graveyard shift without thinking too hard about it. The strip mall sat directly across from one of the city's better-known graveyards, and everyone in Minneapolis seemed to know about it, even if they didn't like talking about it. There's a strange urban legend about that place, about a family of deer that lives there. Not just that they live there, but that they belong there, in some unnatural way. Rumors swirl through town like fallen leaves. People say the deer never blink, never eat, and never seem to die. Others say they're ghosts, or witches in disguise. I usually laugh that kind of stuff off. We all have better things to do than worry about cryptids, especially when bills are due. Still, that night, as I was getting ready, I mentioned the shift to my friend Devon during a quick call. He paused for a second when I told him where I'd be working. "Lake Street, huh? Across from the cemetery?" he said, his voice quieter than usual. "Yeah, so?" I asked, already annoyed at the tone. "Just be mindful, man. People say things get weird out there during the witching hour. I'm not talking about drunk guys looking for trouble. I mean weird, like you start seeing things you don't want to see." I chuckled, brushing him off. "Come on, Dev. I know what a drunk looks like, all right? I'm not new at this." "It's not the drunks you need to worry about," he replied, almost like he was reciting something someone else had told him long ago. There was a silence on the line, then a dry exhale. "Just watch what you joke about out there. You never know what's listening." I scoffed again and hung up shortly after. His words stuck in the back of my mind, even though I told myself I didn't believe in superstitious crap. I grabbed a coffee on the way as the sky turned a soft purple-orange and dusk settled over the city like a blanket. The air was cold, sharp in my lungs. I arrived at the red light near the graveyard, a few blocks from the strip mall, and as I waited, I lazily looked out the passenger window toward the cemetery. That's when I saw it, a deer. It stood just beyond the iron fence, half-shadowed beneath an old crooked willow. Its eyes gleamed like mirrors, reflecting the pale orange streetlight. Then another deer stepped into view, and another. One by one, 5 deer revealed themselves, emerging from behind stones, trees, and hedges. They didn't move toward the fence. They didn't even twitch, just stood there, shoulder to shoulder, staring directly at me. There was something unnatural about it, like they knew I was watching, like they wanted me to watch. I stared back, unsure of what I was even looking for. A twitch, a blink, anything. The sudden blast of a horn behind me made me jump. The light had turned green. As I drove off, I looked in the rearview mirror. The deer were gone, just an empty stretch of gravestones and weeds now. I shook my head, told myself I was tired, and focused on the task at hand. Once at the strip mall, I did my initial patrol. It was the usual scene, empty storefronts, trash scattered near the loading docks, and a couple of homeless folks who shuffled away when they saw my car. Nothing to report, just the static buzz of fluorescent lights and the occasional rustling of a raccoon in a dumpster. I turned the corner of the building and started cruising toward the far side of the lot, where the mall butted up against the edge of the graveyard. That's when I saw it. A trail, thin, dark, and unmistakable. Blood. It snaked along the pavement, leading down the side road between the strip mall and the cemetery. My heart dropped into my stomach like a stone. For a few seconds, all I could do was stare. I grabbed my radio and called my partner, who was patrolling the other side of the strip mall. "Hey man," I said, trying to sound casual. "There's a trail here. Blood. Looks fresh." There was a long pause, longer than I expected. Then his voice crackled back through the radio. "You sure it's blood?" "Positive." "Be careful," he said. That was it. No follow-up. No offer to come check it out. Just those 2 words. I took a deep breath, nodded to myself, and decided to follow it, slowly, cautiously. As I crept the security car down the narrow lane, my thoughts ran wild. What if it was a person, a kid? What if someone needed help? What if it was a setup? At the end of the trail, I saw the source. A raccoon. Its body lay crumpled on the road, clearly hit by a car, and dragged itself a few feet before collapsing. Its fur was matted, ribs showing, blood staining the concrete. I sighed in relief. Roadkill. Nothing more. I chuckled nervously. This was what had me on edge. I was about to radio in the false alarm when something moved at the edge of my vision. A shape approached the street. I turned and saw a deer stepping from the shadows of the strip mall, caught in the glare of my headlights. It moved with slow, deliberate steps, crossing into the road toward the raccoon. I watched it, confused but intrigued. It sniffed the carcass, once, twice, a third time, deep and heavy. Then it lowered its head further, and it bit into the raccoon. I watched, paralyzed, as it tore a strip of flesh from the dead animal and chewed, slowly, methodically. Then it went in for another bite, then another. The air in my lungs froze. I reached for the gear shift with trembling hands. The moment the car jolted slightly in reverse, the deer's head snapped up, its eyes locked onto mine. It didn't run. Instead, it walked toward me. I panicked. Should I back up? Floor it, get out and run, fight a deer? Was I losing my mind? In a moment of irrational desperation, I slammed my hand on the car horn. The blast echoed through the lot. The deer flinched, stumbled back slightly, then bolted. I watched it leap over the cemetery fence like it weighed nothing. It disappeared between tombstones and bare-limbed trees, vanishing into the blackness like a wisp of fog. For a long moment, I didn't move. I just sat there, heart pounding, watching the empty road, making sure nothing else came out. Eventually, I grabbed my radio and called it in. I said I'd found a raccoon, probably roadkill. I left out the part about the deer. My partner had enough things to worry about. I went home that morning with a new understanding of what my friend meant when he said things get weird out by Lake Street. And now, I don't laugh when people mention the graveyard. I don't make jokes. I don't scoff. I just keep my eyes open. And I never look too long at deer. Story 3. The Haunted Gym. From that weird girl who teaches at a creepy private school in California. I teach at a small private school in a smallish city in California. It's the kind of school with deep roots and way too much history. The building is old, like early 1900s old, and steeped in religious tradition. I'm talking about strict, borderline cult-like beliefs that shaped the culture of the place for generations. The school is also situated near a major water source, and I've heard from more than one person that water can be a conductor of spiritual energy. I didn't pay much attention to that until it all started happening. There have always been whispered stories, strange occurrences, unexplained sounds, and even shadowy figures spotted in broad daylight. These aren't just tales from imaginative students. Teachers, staff members, and maintenance workers have all experienced something at some point. I've had my fair share of weirdness here too, but the gym, that place has its own kind of haunted energy, and one morning, it gave me a reason to never walk into that building the same way again. It was early, still dark outside, and the school was silent. I usually arrive before the rest of the staff, just myself and the maintenance guy, for about an hour before anyone else trickles in. That morning, like most, I went to open up the gym. It's usually a quick routine: unlock the main doors, switch on the lights, and make sure everything's in place. But as I pushed the door open and flicked on the lights, something moved in the shadows across the court. It was subtle, like a figure slipping behind the bleachers, but enough to make me freeze. The gym had been locked up all night. No one should have been in there. I immediately called out for the maintenance guy. He came running, but after searching the entire space, there was nothing there. We both brushed it off. He returned to his duties, and I continued mine, though a growing chill clung to my skin. I went to unlock the equipment closet. As I approached, I noticed someone or something sitting in the bleachers. At first glance, it looked like a man, but not fully solid. He wore a wide-brimmed hat and had a cigarette hanging from his mouth, but the cigarette was never fully lit, more like smoke emanating from his entire body. His features were blurred, like he was being seen through a haze. He turned his head slightly, but instead of looking directly at me, his gaze passed right through me, as if I wasn't even there. Despite the California humidity, the air around me went cold. I looked away, hoping I imagined it. When I looked back, he was gone. Trying to shake it off, I turned to unlock the equipment room, but the padlock was hanging loosely from the door, already open. I knew, without a doubt, I hadn't unlocked it. I told myself someone must have forgotten to lock up properly the day before. Still, something in my gut said that wasn't the case. I made my way to the kitchen to check supplies and prep for the day. As I walked through the corridor, a gust of wind, or what felt like it, blew past me. When I turned around, I saw it. A black shadow. This one more solid than the figure I saw in the bleachers. It wasn't smoke. It had form. shape, presence. Unlike the earlier encounter, this one didn't feel like a passive spirit. This one watched. The air grew heavier with each step. I approached the back door, hoping to get out of the room quickly, but the shadow lingered near it, blocking my path. My nerves were unraveling. Still, I hesitated to call the maintenance guy again. He'd already chalked up the last thing to my imagination, and I knew he wouldn't take this seriously. Just then, the heavy kitchen door slammed shut behind me. It was deafening. The noise echoed through the empty halls like a gunshot. I didn't turn back. I didn't want to see what might be standing behind me. I knew, whatever it was, it wasn't human. I left the kitchen and continued my morning route through the classrooms. Everything felt relatively normal until I reached the last room at the far end of the hallway. This classroom was set apart from the others through a pair of heavy double doors and a narrow walkway. The second I stepped through those doors, a weight settled on my chest. The air was thick. Air was suffocating, like walking into a sealed tomb. I took a few steps inside and then I heard it. Laughter. But not the warm, human kind. This was a low, guttural, joyless cackle. A man's laugh, cruel, mocking and evil. My heart pounded in my ears. As I turned to leave, a chair violently slid off one of the tables and hit the floor with a loud crash. I bit down the scream building in my throat and walked out, quickly but carefully, resisting the urge to break into a run. That's when the voices started. Multiple voices, whispering over each other, angry and unintelligible. It felt like I was in the middle of an argument between invisible forces, each trying to assert their dominance in a language I couldn't understand. I fled the room and didn't stop until I reached the office. I sat there, heart racing, trying to calm down. Later that morning, once the sun was up and I felt brave enough, I returned to that room. I had to know if it was real. As I stepped inside, everything was still, quiet. No voices, no laughter. But in the corner of the classroom stood the man with the wide-brimmed hat, the same smoky figure from the gym. He didn't move. He didn't speak. But the threat he radiated filled the room like poison. This time, I didn't stay. I left and didn't look back. Since then, I occasionally hear the evil laughter echoing in the gym, especially when I'm there alone early in the morning. It's not every day, but often enough that I've learned to dread the moments of silence. I've spoken to co-workers, asked if they've seen anything unusual. More than a few have shared their own encounters. Some have seen the shadow, others have heard whispers. A few even mentioned seeing the smoking man. Interestingly, no one sees him in the same place twice. He appears first in the gym, but after that he shows up elsewhere. Classrooms, hallways, even the chapel. He seems tied to the gym though, like it's his anchor. I did some digging. Based on descriptions and local rumors, the man could have been a former pastor at the school decades ago. He was known for his fanatical views, a fire and brimstone type who believed punishment was the only path to redemption. There's a story about a gym teacher who played a pop song during a student game. The pastor made her kneel and pray for forgiveness every morning for weeks and forced her to apologize to everyone who attended the game. He ruled with fear, and it's said he was physically abusive to those who stepped out of line. Ironically, smoking, strictly forbidden by the church, was his vice. When he was caught, the board turned on him. He was humiliated, asked to resign, and banned from the property. Furious, he allegedly tried to set fire to the school. The fire didn't destroy everything, but it gutted a few classrooms, the very ones most active now. He was arrested, but somehow charges didn't stick. He got out and managed to talk his way into a meeting with the board to defend his honor. They let him back in to collect some personal belongings. Instead of going to his old office, he went to the gym. A church member followed him, suspicious of his behavior. She entered just in time to hear him say, "I love this church, and I will not leave." Then, he pulled out a gun and shot himself in the head. He never left. I believe he still lingers in the school because he refuses to give up control. His spirit is tied to this place, especially the gym, where his story ended in blood and smoke. I've seen him several times since. I'm no longer afraid of seeing him. But that laughter, that terrible, hollow, demonic laughter, that still terrifies me. Story 4. The Night the Dog Said Goodbye, by Novamped, rewritten and expanded. It was another long night at the veterinary clinic, the kind that dragged like the tick of a tired old clock, slow, heavy, and relentless. I was working the overnight shift again, running on cheap coffee, emotional fatigue, and a stubborn sense of duty. The emergencies always came in waves, and tonight felt like the tide was just beginning to rise. The clinic wasn't a place that ever felt warm, and it wasn't just because of the sterile white walls or the flickering overhead lights that buzzed like irritated hornets. No, it was something deeper, something colder. Our boss was a man without softness. He had a sharp tongue and an even sharper temper, always barking orders like the world owed him silence. He treated his staff with a strange mixture of disdain and indifference, like we were replaceable parts in some machine he barely maintained. Clients didn't fare much better. There was a cruel edge in the way he dismissed their fears, their tears. But I stayed, because I was still learning, still growing, and because despite everything, I loved the animals. I saw them not as medical cases or tasks on a clipboard. To me, each one was a story, a little soul wrapped in fur, feathers, or scales. Each had their own silent language of pain, hope, or gratitude, and I tried to listen. That night, the call came in just after 10 p.m. A Bernese mountain dog, older, large, and fading fast. His family was on their way. When they arrived, I was waiting by the doors. The dog lay limp in the back seat, his eyes barely open, breathing shallow. The father looked worn out. The mother clutched a leash like it was the only thing holding her together. But it was the daughter who broke my heart, maybe 10 or 11 years old, with big tear-filled eyes and a trembling mouth that said more than words ever could. We rushed the dog in, placed him gently on the examination table. I could already tell he was at the edge. After the exam and a quiet, careful discussion with the family, we reached the conclusion that no vet ever wants to deliver but must do with grace. Euthanasia was the kindest path. His body was in pain, shutting down. Every breath he took looked like it cost him something. They agreed, though no part of them truly accepted it. The daughter held his paw tightly, whispering goodbye through her sobs. I gave her time, more than my boss would have allowed. I pretended not to notice the ticking of the clock or the way the back hall light flickered like it always did before the breaker buzzed. This moment wasn't mine, and it wasn't for time. It was for love and grief and saying the things you can't ever say again. When the family finally left, I helped prepare his body. We placed him gently in a large black body bag, something that always felt too clinical for what it really meant. I labeled it with his name, even though I didn't have to. Monty, it said in black ink. It felt wrong not to write his name, like erasing him. We couldn't release the body yet. The family had arranged for a special transport vehicle that wouldn't be available until morning, so we moved him to the back, the coldest part of the clinic. The freezer wasn't quite full, which was a blessing. Sometimes we had to stack bodies, and that always left a hollow in my stomach. I didn't cry right away. I never did at work, not in front of him. But later, when I was alone in the supply closet, pretending to check stock, I let it out. The tears fell in silence. Not just for Monty, but for all the quiet losses that never made noise. The next day, the family called. Could we keep Monty for a few more days? Their plans had changed. Yes, of course. No problem. I understood. Grief doesn't run on a schedule. That night, while I was cleaning the back, mopping up the day's sadness, restocking medication and double-checking forms, I saw something, just out of the corner of my eye. A shape. A movement. At first I thought my mind was playing tricks on me, exhausted as I was. But then I turned, and I swear on everything I know I saw him. Monty. He wasn't solid. He didn't have fur or muscle or breath, but he had shape. Tall, broad, graceful in a ghostly way. He moved like mist or smoke, gliding through the hallway in silence. He didn't look at me, but I could feel something. Like peace. Like recognition. He disappeared just as quickly. Maybe 2-3 seconds, no sound, no fear, just gone. I stood still, mop in hand, heart quiet but heavy. And then, of course, my boss stormed in like a thundercloud. Why are you just standing there? Floors aren't gonna mop themselves. He stopped mid-rant when he looked at me. You look like you've seen a ghost. Maybe I had. The next day, Monty's family came to take him home for the last time. They arrived in a black hearse, an actual one. I wasn't expecting that. It was surreal, yet somehow fitting. They had dressed in dark clothes. They carried flowers. When we brought the simple cardboard coffin to them, the daughter ran to it. She wrapped her arms around it like it was still warm, like she could feel him there, inside. She wouldn't let go for the longest time. Not until her father gently placed a hand on her shoulder and whispered something too soft for me to hear. That was the moment that finally cracked me. Not the ghost, not the grief, but the love. That stubborn, unwavering love that wouldn't let go. That stayed. That remembered. I never saw Monty again, not in this world or the next, but sometimes late at night I still think about that moment, about how he looked back at me in the hallway, about how I might have been the last one to see him move, even in spirit. I like to believe he came back not for himself, but to say goodbye. To her. To me. Maybe even to the place he called home, if only for a short time. A few months after that, I was fired. My boss told me flat out, "You're not good enough." I wanted to scream at him, tell him I wasn't here for good enough. I was here for the animals, for the moments no one else stayed for. But I didn't argue. I just packed my things and left. I've never missed that clinic. I hope one day someone with compassion will shut it down, because no animal soul deserves to spend their final moments in a place so cold, so joyless, so unkind. But I'll always remember Monty. I'll remember the daughter's tears, the way she clung to that box. I'll remember the misty shape that walked through the hallway like it belonged there. And I'll hold on to the quiet hope that somewhere, somehow, Monty remembers me too. Because even ghosts need someone to say goodbye. Story 5. Renaissance Demon. Working at a Renaissance fair might seem like a dream job to many. It's a life full of vibrant costumes, historical reenactments, and a tight-knit community of artisans and performers. We're a family of blacksmiths, herbalists, musicians, and actors who spend our weekends recreating medieval life for curious tourists. Most people think it's all fun and games, playing dress-up, pretending to be something from the past. They don't understand that when the line between performance and reality begins to blur, strange things can happen, things that no one at the fair ever expects. The first time I heard the chanting, I was busy adjusting my blacksmith setup, hammering a few horseshoes for the day's demonstrations. I thought it was just Tobias, one of the actors in the troupe, rehearsing his lines again. Tobias had a role as a monk, and he took it incredibly seriously. He memorized actual Latin prayers, carried around a well-worn Bible, and fully embraced the character. I'd often hear him muttering prayers or chanting under his breath as he walked between tents. But when I heard the chanting that evening, it was different. I glanced up from my work, expecting to see Tobias somewhere nearby, maybe in the middle of a rehearsal, but when I looked around, I couldn't see him. The chanting seemed to be coming from behind the privies, that dead space between our encampment and the woods. It was low, rhythmic, and unmistakably Latin, echoing into the darkening air. It felt wrong. The sound had an eerie, hollow quality, like it was coming from somewhere far away, yet close at the same time. Curiosity tugged at me, and I walked over to investigate, thinking I'd find some larpers who had wandered off, or someone perhaps goofing around. But when I got to the spot where the chanting had been, the area was empty. No one was there. The air felt thick, heavy, like something was watching me. And then I noticed the smell. Sulfur. It wasn't strong, but it was unmistakable. I assumed it was just some poorly maintained camp stove or someone's fire pit burning off some odd odor, but it stuck with me. By the time September rolled around that year, I had learned a hard lesson. Working Renaissance fairs is generally fun. You get to spend your weekends in wool and leather, sweating under the hot sun, while tourists snap pictures and argue about whether your hand-forged nails are authentic enough. Despite the heat, despite the long hours, I loved it. I loved the sense of community, the craftsmanship, the historical accuracy, and even the pretense of it all. But the longer I worked these events, the more I understood how thin the veil between reality and performance really was. My second unsettling experience occurred during one of our late-night shifts. The fair had closed for the night, and most of the vendors were either asleep or gathered around someone's fire pit, relaxing after a long day of working the crowds. I was alone at my forge, finishing up some horseshoes for the next day's demonstration. The flickering lantern light cast shadows that danced around me, the rhythmic sound of my hammer striking iron blending with the quiet hum of crickets in the background. That's when I saw him. At first I thought it was just someone walking by, one of the reenactors perhaps, but then I realized it was someone I didn't recognize. A figure in a black hooded robe, standing at the edge of our encampment, just outside the circle of light from my forge. His silhouette was perfect, a medieval image that could have stepped straight out of history. He moved with purpose, his every step calculated, deliberate. No one moved like that, not even our most dedicated reenactors. Then, the figure raised one arm, pointing directly at me. I felt my breath catch in my throat. For a split second, I could have sworn the flames in my forge flared higher, as though reacting to his presence. I set down my hammer quickly. "Hey!" I called out, trying to catch his attention. "The fair is closed. Do you need help? Are you lost?" The figure didn't respond. He simply stood there, arm extended toward me. I felt an overwhelming sense of unease creep up my spine. After a long, tense moment, he turned without a word and walked into the darkness between the vendor booths. His footsteps were so quiet that I didn't even hear him leave. I grabbed my flashlight and hurried after him, but when I reached the spot where I had seen him, there was nothing. No sign of him anywhere. No footprints in the dirt, not a trace of his presence. It was as if he had vanished into thin air. The next morning I mentioned it to Wren, the woman who ran the herb and apothecary booth next to mine. She was one of the older vendors, someone who had been on the Renaissance fair circuit longer than anyone else. She listened carefully and didn't seem at all surprised by my account. Instead, she nodded and told me I needed to start carrying iron, not steel, but actual iron. Old protection, she said. She handed me a small, crude iron nail, pressing it into my palm. "Keep this on you," she instructed quietly. "You'll need it." A few days later, we were gearing up for our busiest event of the season, 3 days in the northeast, with over 20,000 visitors. The fair had grown massive, with multiple stages, a jousting field, and even a small castle facade set up for photo ops. That's when I first saw what the robed figure really was. I was delivering a custom piece to a regular customer who traveled from event to event in full noble regalia, a true LARPer. She had requested a set of ornate door hinges for her pavilion, each one hand-carved with intricate roses. As I approached her tent on Saturday evening, I heard her voice, raised in distress. "I told you I don't want your blessing. Please just leave me alone." Through the open tent flap, I saw her backing away from something, her eyes wide with fear. And there, in the shadows, was the same hooded figure I had seen before. This time I could see his face clearly. Pale, greyish skin, hollow eyes, and a grin that sent a shiver down my spine. He was chanting again, the same Latin words I had heard before. The woman spotted me at the door, and her face immediately flooded with relief. "Thank God you're here," she gasped. "Please, make him stop. Make him leave." I didn't know what to do. My hand clenched around the iron nail Wren had given me. It had been weighing heavy in my pocket all evening, and now, as I gripped it, I felt it begin to heat up in my hand. It burned. I yanked my hand out of my pocket, shouting in pain, and when I looked up, the figure was gone. The woman collapsed into a corner of her tent, hyperventilating. Several other vendors came running, and we told them she had had a panic attack. No one questioned it, but the woman wasn't quite right. She packed up and left that night, but before she went, she pulled me aside. "I don't know who that was," she said, voice shaking, "but he knew my real name. Not who I am as a LARPer, but my real name. Why did he look like that? How did he know me?" I had no answers for her, but I was starting to realize that things were getting worse. The next event was in the Midwest, an area with a reputation for being cursed. Every year, something always seemed to go wrong. Severe weather, accidents, fights between reenactors that turned violent. But this year felt different from the start. When Tobias found me setting up my forge on Thursday night, he looked visibly shaken, clutching his prop Bible to his chest like it was the only thing protecting him from something dark. "I need to tell you something," he said, glancing around nervously. "You know that Latin chanting everyone's been hearing?" I nodded, bracing myself. "I know what it is." Tobias opened his Bible to a page marked with strips of cloth, authenticating it as a relic. He pointed to a passage in Latin, and as I read the English translation, I felt my blood run cold. It spoke of a demon, one that corrupted celebrations, one that embodied the spirit of celebration itself, turning it into something dark, something that fed on the chaos. That weekend, the sightings became more frequent. I saw the hooded figure again, standing behind vendor booths, always just far enough away that I couldn't get a clear look at his face. Other people started noticing it too. Sir Aldrich, who performed in sword-fighting duels, reported seeing someone in monk robes watching his demonstrations from the tree line. Reen mentioned finding footprints near her tent that just stopped, mid-step, like someone had vanished. The strangest event happened on Saturday night. I was finishing some pieces for Sunday's customers when I heard voices again, low, chanting voices. Speaking in Latin, I assumed it was just Tobias practicing early, but when I went to check, I found he was asleep in his tent. The voice was coming from the woods behind the camp. I grabbed my flashlight and followed the sound. But the moment I stepped toward the trees, the chanting stopped. The forest fell into an eerie silence. By Sunday, multiple vendors had reported seeing the figure during daylight hours, standing right in the middle of crowds. But no one else seemed to notice. The tourists didn't say a word. They didn't ask about the strange figure. I didn't see him again until November at our last event. It was small, just a handful of vendors in the southeast. I was packing up my forge early Sunday morning when I felt it again, eyes on me. The hooded figure stood about 30 feet away near the equipment shed. This time I saw his face clearly. It was no longer human, grey with hollow eyes, the skin stretched tight across its skull, and in the blink of an eye he was gone. That was 2 years ago. I still travel with the fair circuit, but I'm more cautious now. I take breaks when I need them, step out of character when I have to, and remember who I am outside the apron, and I never work alone after dark anymore. Because some things, once you see them, they never truly leave you. Story 6. The Beast by the Road. It was about 3 years ago when I found myself working on a road construction project for the county. We had landed a contract to repave a stretch of highway that connected 2 small towns. I can't give you the names of those towns. It's not important, and honestly, it's probably better that way. The road itself was the kind of place where you could drive for miles without seeing much of anything except wide, open fields and thick, dense woods. A real stretch of rural isolation. The whole job was set for nighttime work because of the heavy traffic during the day, and I was part of a crew that was assigned to the 11 p.m. to 7 a.m. shift. The team consisted of 3 of us, Garrett, Dwayne, and me. Garrett had been working road construction longer than I'd been alive. He was one of those guys who knew everything there was to know about heavy machinery, construction, and could fix any piece of equipment with just some duct tape and whatever else was lying around. He was calm, steady, and seemed to take everything in stride. Dwayne, on the other hand, was closer to my age, late 20s, and had been with the county for about 5 years. He was a good guy too, not quite as seasoned as Garrett, but dependable and easygoing. All in all, we made a good crew. We were working on a particularly isolated section of the highway. On one side was the old, cracked asphalt we were tearing up, and on the other was a steep embankment, overgrown with tall grass and scrub brush. The slope dropped about 15 feet before the trees started, and beyond that was nothing but thick, dark woods stretching on for miles. In the daylight, you'd sometimes spot a deer or two, but at night, the place felt completely deserted. It was just us and our work lights cutting through the oppressive darkness. Around 2 a.m. one Wednesday morning, we were taking a break after a few hours of laying asphalt. The machinery had been pretty quiet for a while, and there weren't many cars passing by. That's when we first heard it. It was a sound coming from the thick grass on the edge of the embankment, just beyond the glow of our work lights. The noise was strange, kind of like a baby crying, but not quite right. It wasn't the high-pitched wail you expect from an infant. It was more of a gurgling sound, like someone was trying to imitate a baby's cry but couldn't get it quite right. It lasted only about 10 seconds before it stopped. "The heck was that?" Dwayne asked, looking at Garrett and me. "Just some nocturnal critter," Garrett replied, barely looking up from his coffee. "I wouldn't go around getting all paranoid about a raccoon, guys." I wasn't so sure. I'd heard raccoons before, and this didn't sound like any raccoon, but I didn't say anything. I figured Garrett was right, and we were just being jumpy. That is, until it happened again. A few moments later, we heard the same, strange, wrong-sounding baby gurgle coming from the same direction. I could pinpoint it more clearly now, from the edge of the tall grass, where the slope started. I wasn't sure what was making it, but it definitely wasn't just a normal animal noise. "I'm going to check it out," I said, putting my coffee down and grabbing a flashlight. Dwayne looked at me like I'd lost my mind. "You're not actually going down there, right? It's probably just a raccoon. You really want to go down there and deal with that?" "If it's a raccoon, I can handle it," I said, not backing down. "But if something's hurt down there, maybe we could help it." Dwayne just shook his head. "It's my funeral," he muttered under his breath. I walked toward the edge of the work area where the embankment began. The grass was tall, maybe chest high in places, and thick enough that I couldn't see more than a few feet in front of me. I clicked on my flashlight, and the beam barely made it past the first few feet of tall grass before it was swallowed up by the darkness. I stood there for a moment, waiting for the sound to return. Sure enough, it did. This time it came from right in front of me, just 10 feet or so down the slope, where the grass grew especially thick. I took one step down the slope, and that's when all hell broke loose. The thing screamed. No bark, no growl, no normal animal noise. This was a scream, high-pitched, terrified, but with a horrible, wet, distorted quality to it. My heart raced as something large began crashing through the grass just in front of me. The sound of movement was frantic, like whatever it was charging at me. In the split second that my flashlight beam caught the shape, I saw it. It was about the size of a large dog, but it was covered in short, sharp spikes that glinted under the flashlight's light. It didn't run the way a normal animal would. It moved sideways through the grass, like some sort of oversized crab, scattering erratically instead of charging straight at me. Before I could even process what I'd just seen, it was gone. The thing crashed deeper into the grass and down toward the tree line, and I could hear it moving for a few moments, branches snapping, grass rustling, before it faded into the distance. Then, there was nothing. I backed up a few quick steps, my heart pounding. I turned around, and Garrett and Dwayne were standing there staring at me. Their coffee cups were forgotten in their hands, and they looked like they'd just seen a ghost. "What the heck was that?" Dwayne asked, his voice full of disbelief. "You guys saw and heard that too?" I asked, trying to make sense of what had just happened. Garrett's eyes were wide. "Brother, I saw that whole thing. It stood up and took off like a bat out of hell." We all stood there for the next hour, not really working, just talking about what we'd seen. Dwayne was convinced it was a chupacabra. He'd grown up in a different state, and his grandmother used to tell him stories about those creatures. Garrett thought it might have been some kind of sick, deformed dog, maybe one that had gotten sick and was moving weirdly because of it. But none of us really knew what to make of it. I couldn't imagine any dog moving like that, and I'd never heard any dog make sounds like that, either. We finished our shift, but none of us were eager to go anywhere near the embankment when the day crew showed up to relieve us at 7 a.m. We didn't mention what happened to them, at least I didn't. I didn't want to spook anyone or make them think I was losing my mind. The next night we showed up late. Traffic had been bad coming out of town, and when we arrived at the worksite, we noticed something strange. The day crew wasn't packing up and leaving like usual. They were all gathered near the edge of the embankment, talking in hushed voices. There were 6 or 7 of them, just standing around, looking uneasy. I walked up to Miguel, the day shift foreman. "Yo, what's going on out here?" I asked. "You ain't going to believe this," Miguel said, shaking his head. "We've been hearing weird sounds coming from down in the grass all day. Sounds like a baby crying or something, but not right. A couple of the guys have seen something moving around down there too. It's big enough to shake the grass, but it never comes out into the open." Dwayne shot me a look, his face going pale. "What are you talking about?" I asked. "Well, around lunchtime, Bobby tossed half of his sandwich down into the grass just to see what would happen," Miguel explained. "Next thing you know, this head snapped out, grabbed it faster than you could blink, and then took off into the grass." Garrett raised an eyebrow. "What did the head look like?" he asked. "Bobby said it looked like a pit bull, but all wrong," Miguel replied. "The skin was missing in places, and the shape was all off. Scared the crap out of him." We all turned to look at Bobby, who was standing a little apart from the group, nervously smoking a cigarette. He looked shaken. "Some of the guys think we should report it," Miguel said, "but others think it's just a sick dog, and we should leave it alone. Problem is, now half the crew is spooked and doesn't want to work this section anymore." Even in the daylight, there was something unsettling about that embankment. The tall grass seemed to hide something, and it made the whole area feel wrong. You couldn't see anything clearly, and anything could be lurking in the shadows. I was about to say something when Garrett cut in. "Nope, nothing out of the ordinary last night. We worked that shift, but the weird sounds didn't come back." And they didn't. Not that night or the night after that. After about a week of quiet, people started to relax. We finished repaving that stretch of road without any further incidents, but the story didn't die down. In fact, it seemed to get more exaggerated as time went on. People began saying it might have been a bear. Others swore the creature had glowing eyes. One guy even swore his cousin knew someone who saw it in broad daylight and said it looked like a hairless gorilla. I don't know what to believe. Maybe it was a sick animal displaced by the construction. Maybe it was something else entirely. All I know is that when I drive past that stretch of road now, I keep my windows up and I don't look over at the embankment too long, just in case. Story 7. People are always curious about what it's like working on wind turbines, and I can tell you the height takes some getting used to. These things are enormous. When you're working on a good day, you're easily 300 feet up, sometimes even 400 feet depending on the model. And when you're that high in the air, you start to notice the world in a whole new way. There's something about being so far off the ground that shifts your perspective. The air feels thinner, the sounds from the ground seem muted, and the sense of isolation is overwhelming at times. It's just you and the wind up there. I've been doing this job for about 8 years now. I started right out of trade school, eager to get my hands on the equipment and learn the ropes. The company I work for manages and maintains turbines across 3 states, so I've probably climbed more towers than I could even count. Most days are routine, checking the blades, doing general maintenance, cleaning off bird droppings, or fixing electrical components. But with so many hours spent so high up, it's only a matter of time before you see something that leaves you questioning what you know. One of my first strange experiences occurred about 5 years ago, when I was stationed at a wind farm sitting atop rolling hills about an hour outside the city. I can't name the exact location, but let's just say it's a quiet, remote place. No bustling towns nearby, just miles and miles of land and the occasional dirt road. I was up early one morning, maybe around 7 a.m., when I began working on the nacelle housing, the part of the turbine that houses the generator and other machinery. As I was working, I noticed something strange, a huge flock of crows. Now, it's not unusual to see crows around wind turbines. Those birds are incredibly smart, a little too smart sometimes. They figured out that the tall structures make great perches, but this situation felt off. There had to be at least 200 of them, all gathered in perfect rows, sitting on the ground directly beneath the tower. Not scattered about like you might expect, but arranged neatly, almost like they were waiting for something. What really set the scene apart was their silence. Crows are never quiet. They're loud. They caw and squawk constantly. But these crows, not a sound. It was eerie. They didn't even move. I watched them for about 10 minutes while I worked, but they remained perfectly still, facing the same direction. It wasn't natural. Then, without warning, the entire group of them took off. But it wasn't like how flocks of birds typically scatter in all directions when they're startled. No, this was coordinated, like something out of a military drill. They rose in perfect formation, circled the tower 3 times, and then, in unison, they shot off toward the horizon, disappearing into the distance. I was so taken aback by it that when my supervisor came up the tower an hour later to check on my progress, I told him about it. He didn't seem all that concerned, just shrugged and said, "Crows can be weird sometimes." But I knew what I had seen. I've never seen anything like it since, and I can't explain it. The second strange experience came 2 years later, when I was working at a different wind farm about 300 miles north of the first one. This place was just as remote, nestled between fields of wheat and old dirt roads. I was up there performing routine maintenance on the rotor assembly. It was a clear afternoon, visibility was perfect, and I had a long stretch of time ahead of me, so I packed a lunch. I was about 200 feet up when I noticed something odd in the distance. At first, I thought it might be a plane, a small aircraft, maybe a private helicopter. Nothing out of the ordinary, considering the area's proximity to some government property. But as I zoomed in with my binoculars, I realized it wasn't a plane at all. It was stationary, hovering in the sky, a metallic disc, about the size of a small house, hanging about 1,000 feet in the air. It didn't have wings, rotors, or anything that would explain how it stayed aloft. No sound either. The silence was unnerving. Usually at that height, sound carries easily. But this object, whatever it was, made none. I kept working but checked on it every few minutes. It stayed there for nearly an hour, hovering, unmoving. Around 3:30 p.m., I glanced up again and was shocked to see it vanish. It didn't slowly drift away like a normal aircraft. No, it shot straight up into the sky, faster than anything I'd ever seen, disappearing in less than 3 seconds. I didn't know what to make of it. I reported the sighting, thinking it might have been some kind of military aircraft, but when I called the regional airport to log it, they told me there were no exercises or radar anomalies that day. So, what was it? I still don't know. The third incident happened just 6 months after that, and I was back at the same wind farm. I'd come to think that particular location was a magnet for strange occurrences. I was performing a gearbox inspection, working about 250 feet up on a clear, sunny day. As I was scanning the horizon, I noticed something again. This time, it was the same metallic disc, hovering in the exact same spot I had seen it before. My heart skipped a beat. I quickly grabbed my phone, hoping to capture some photos or video. But the moment I unlocked my phone and opened the camera app, everything went black. Complete blackness. I don't remember anything after that, just the sensation of falling into darkness. The next thing I knew, I was hanging by my harness, disoriented, and my legs felt weak. I had blacked out. The safety system had caught me, which I was incredibly thankful for, but the experience left me shaken. I had no idea how long I'd been out, but according to my phone, I'd been hanging there for about 40 minutes. I didn't report this incident. I didn't want to risk losing my position over something that might be brushed off as a freak occurrence. Besides, I wasn't sure what happened. I wasn't prone to fainting, and I wasn't sick. I didn't want to take the chance that they'd think I wasn't fit to work on turbines anymore. Then, the fourth story happened, and this one was the creepiest by far. It took place about a year ago, at a wind farm built on land that used to be farmland, near an old Civil War battlefield. The battlefield itself was only a couple of miles away, marked by one of those historical plaques. It wasn't something I paid much attention to at first, but the area definitely had a certain vibe. I had been working on one particular turbine that had been giving me electrical issues. Over the course of a week, I found myself going up and down that tower more times than I could count. The turbine itself made me feel uneasy. There was no logical explanation for it, but every time I was up there it felt like something was watching me. Something about it didn't feel right. I brushed it off at first, but that feeling of unease only got worse. One day, I was about 250 feet up, adjusting some wiring when I felt it, a hand grabbing my ankle, not a brush or a bump, but an actual firm grip around my leg, right above my boot. I jerked my head down, expecting to see someone climbing up behind me, but there was no one there. I was completely alone on the tower. My harness was secure, and there was no way someone could have gotten that close to me without me noticing. But I could feel the pressure of fingers pressing into my leg, through my coveralls. It lasted for about 5 seconds before it released, and I froze. I quickly descended, too rattled to go back up until the next day. I didn't tell my supervisor exactly what had happened. I made up some excuse about a wasp nest near the platform, something to explain away the feeling without getting into the strange experience I'd had. But it happened again. The same thing. When I wasn't paying attention, focused on something else, it grabbed me again. It actually shifted my weight and caused me to stumble against the railing. I finished my job as quickly as I could, but after that, I asked my supervisor to assign someone else to that wind farm. I wasn't sure what to make of it, and I didn't want to risk anything else happening. Later on, when I mentioned the incident to some of the local workers, one of them told me that the area was considered haunted. Apparently, there had been a lot of death during the Civil War battle fought nearby, and the land had once hosted a hospital barracks. At that point, I started to reconsider my stance on ghost stories. I've never been a huge believer in that kind of thing, but when you're 250 feet up on a tower and something you can't see grabs your leg, it changes the way you think about things. It's an unsettling feeling, one I hope I never have to experience again. Story 8. The Whispering Pines. I work in a small rural logging town nestled deep in the Appalachian foothills. It's the kind of place most people drive through without a second thought, but for the few of us who live here, it's home. The people here are a hardy bunch, used to the quiet, the isolation, and the unpredictable weather, but there are some things, some stories, that even the toughest among us don't like to talk about. I've been a foreman for the logging company for the past 10 years. It's a steady job, hard work, but nothing I haven't gotten used to over the years. There are days I wish I could leave it all behind. The sawdust, the constant hum of chainsaws, the smell of pine sap clinging to everything. But something always keeps me here. Maybe it's the land, or maybe it's the people. Whatever it is, it's never easy to leave, no matter how much I think about it. I never gave much thought to the stories the older folks in town would tell. Things like the Wendigo of Cold Creek or the Shadow in the Pines. Spooky stories meant to scare kids and keep them from wandering off too far into the woods. But I learned, the hard way, that some stories hold more truth than you expect. It all started on a crisp fall morning about a year ago. The company had secured a new contract, a massive stretch of land that ran deep into the forest, beyond any trail we'd worked before. They'd logged the area many years ago, but it had grown wild again. Trees were thick and dense, the underbrush heavy, and the air always seemed damp, even when it hadn't rained for days. I had my crew set up camp near an old logging trail, long forgotten by most. The place had a quiet that felt unnatural. There was always a faint rustle in the trees, as if something was watching, moving just out of view. but I chalked it up to my imagination. After all, this was the woods, and strange noises were common. It's when you start thinking they mean something that things get real. That morning, I sent Paul, one of my most reliable men, out to scout the land. He was the kind of guy who didn't believe in superstitions, always joking about how the old stories were just that, stories. The kind that kept the local children entertained. But Paul had a look in his eye when he came back that day, a look I'd never seen on him before. It wasn't fear, not exactly, but something else, something unsettled. "Boss," he said, his voice rough, like he'd been holding back something all morning. "You're gonna want to take a walk with me, down the East Ridge. There's something strange about it." I didn't like the sound of that. We'd been cutting through this area for weeks, and up until that point, everything had been normal. But the tone in Paul's voice told me something had changed. I grabbed my jacket and met him at the edge of camp. The forest was still and quiet, as if holding its breath. We made our way up the old logging trail, the ground soft beneath our boots, each step muffled by the blanket of pine needles. The further we went, the more the air seemed to thicken, pressing in on us. When we reached the ridge, I understood what he meant. The trees there were ancient, twisted, their trunks bent at unnatural angles. The pines seemed to groan under the weight of time, their needles sparse, giving the whole place a hollowed-out look. But what really struck me was the silence. Not even the birds called here. No rustling animals, no wind, just a heavy, all-encompassing quiet that felt wrong. "There's something wrong with this place," Paul muttered, his voice barely above a whisper. I didn't argue. The air felt heavy, almost oppressive, and as I looked out over the ridge, something moved in the corner of my eye, just at the edge of the trees. My heart skipped a beat. It was gone before I could make sense of it. A shadow? A figure? I turned to Paul, but he was staring in the same direction, his eyes wide, searching the trees like he'd seen something too. "You saw that, right?" I asked, my voice barely audible. Paul nodded slowly. "I did, but I don't know what the hell it was. We should get back to camp." But as we turned to leave, the feeling only deepened. That sense of being watched. A presence that hovered just beyond the trees, just out of sight. We made our way back to camp quickly, but the rest of the day was filled with an uneasy tension. No one talked much. The crew went about their work, but something was off, like the whole place was holding its breath, waiting for something to happen. That night, things got worse. We set up a watch schedule as usual, but the quiet continued, growing deeper, more suffocating. I didn't sleep much. Every creak of the trees, every snap of a twig underfoot made my heart race. Around midnight, I decided to take a walk around the perimeter of camp, just to shake off the unease. As I walked, I heard something. A soft, low sound, like a hum or a distant moan. I froze. It wasn't the wind, and it wasn't any animal I knew. The noise was too deliberate, too human. I followed the sound toward the ridge. As I neared the trees, I stopped. There was something different about the way the branches were moving. They weren't swaying with the breeze, but rather shifting in a pattern, almost like they were being bent or pulled by some unseen force. And then I saw it, a figure just standing at the edge of the trees. I froze, my blood running cold. It was a man, or at least it looked like one, but something was wrong with him. His limbs were too long, his posture twisted. His face, I couldn't make it out, but I knew I shouldn't have been seeing him at all. The air around him felt like it was vibrating, like the world itself was rejecting his presence. I don't know how long I stood there, rooted to the spot, but eventually I backed away slowly, not taking my eyes off of him until I was far enough to turn and run. When I got back to camp, I was breathless, my heart pounding in my chest. I didn't say anything to the crew. What could I say? They'd think I was losing my mind. But after that night, things didn't get any better. The shadows in the trees seemed darker, deeper, the silence more oppressive. Every morning, the men would whisper about the things they'd seen or heard during the night. Some of them even swore they'd seen figures moving through the woods, figures that didn't quite look human. We finished the job. We had to. But as we left the site for the last time, I knew I would never return to that forest. I couldn't. The land had changed, and whatever had been waiting there, hidden for so long, had awakened. But that wasn't the end of it. I've heard the stories since then. People around here don't talk much about it, but I hear whispers from time to time. About strange figures in the woods, about things that shouldn't be there, things that can't be explained. They're still out there, I'm sure of it. And sometimes, when the wind blows just right, I hear a faint hum in the distance, coming from deep in the trees. I try not to listen too closely, but I know now, some things are better left in the dark, buried beneath the pines.